There are moments the record books don't tell. Stories that were buried not because they lacked greatness, but because they made the wrong people uncomfortable. In the fall of 1968, the Denver Broncos were desperate. Their season was collapsing, their fans restless, and their quarterbacks broken. Then came a young man from Omaha, calm, fast, and fearless, Marlon Briscoe. He was everything the league said a black man couldn't be: poised under pressure, sharp with strategy, and dangerous with both arm and his mind. They called him the magician because every Sunday he made the impossible look effortless. And just when he proved he could lead, just when Denver finally started winning, they took it all away. He wasn't benched for throwing interceptions, he wasn't cut for breaking rules. He was erased for breaking a boundary. This is the story of how the first black starting quarterback in modern pro football gave the league a glimpse of the future, and how the league tried to make sure that future never came. Before the controversy, before the silence, Marlon Briscoe was the most electrifying man Denver had ever seen. In the summer of 1968, he arrived at Broncos training camp as a long shot, a rookie drafted in the 14th round out of Omaha University, listed as a defensive back. No one in management ever imagined he touched the football as a quarterback. Not a black man, not in the National Football League. But Marlon Briscoe wasn't built to fit expectations. He was smooth, confident, and unnervingly calm under pressure. At Omaha, he had thrown for over 4,400 yards and 52 touchdowns. He wasn't just fast, he was strategic, reading defenses before the ball was even snapped. His teammates called him the magician because he could turn disaster into highlight, evading sacks, twisting, darting, and still delivering strikes downfield. That fall, Denver's offense was falling apart. Quarterbacks were injured, plays were failing, fans were booing. Out of desperation, the coaches gave Briscoe a single series under center, one drive to prove he could handle it. He took the field, the first black man to ever line up at quarterback in the modern NFL, with the crowd half curious and half skeptical. By the end of the drive, he had thrown a touchdown. The next week, he started. Denver won. Then they won again. Each game was another illusion. How could this rookie, this outsider, make the impossible look easy? The city fell in love. The newspapers called him the magician in bold print. He was calm in the pocket, deadly in motion, and impossible to figure out. For a moment, it felt like history was changing right there on the field. But the men in charge didn't see magic. They saw a problem. Because if Marlon Briscoe could lead a team, what else could he do? And what would that mean for the image the NFL had built? At first, Denver loved him. The fans, the press, even the players. Everyone could feel the spark that Marlon Briscoe brought to a franchise grasping for life. His mobility turned broken plays into miracles. His passes cut through defenses that never saw him coming. Each win felt like a small revolution. The city was falling under the spell of the magician. But behind closed doors, executives and coaches weren't celebrating. They were uneasy. The idea of a black man leading a huddle in 1968, giving orders, calling plays, commanding white teammates, made some of them uncomfortable in ways they couldn't even articulate. Every touchdown brought more praise, but also more whispers. The front office began asking questions about his attitude. Reporters shifted their tone from wonder to suspicion. When Denver's season ended, Briscoe had thrown for more touchdowns than any rookie in the team's history. He'd proven, beyond any doubt, that he could lead. But instead of building around him, the Broncos signed two new white quarterbacks. They never even offered him a chance to compete for the job. No meetings, no explanation, just silence. Marlin showed up to training camp anyway, ready to fight for his position. His locker had been moved, his playbook reassigned. His name was no longer on the quarterback roster. It was over, just like that. The first black starting quarterback in modern pro football was erased from the story. He wasn't cut for throwing interceptions. He was cut for throwing too well. When the Broncos pushed Marlon Briscoe out, he believed talent would protect him. He thought another team would see the film, see the numbers, and come calling. That's how the NFL worked, or so he thought. But the phone never rang. Week after week, The headlines celebrated white rookies with half his stats, while his name vanished from every conversation. He packed his bags and called around the league himself. Coaches gave polite excuses, said the roster was full or the playbook was too complex. Some didn't bother hiding the truth. "We're not ready for that kind of attention," one told him. Translation: "We're not ready for a black quarterback to lead white men." Months passed. His confidence slipped into disbelief. He'd make history on the field, and now history was pretending he never existed. His highlight reels disappeared from TV archives. Reporters stopped mentioning his name. It was as if Denver's magician had been made to vanish for real. Finally, Buffalo called, but not for a quarterback. They wanted him as a receiver. Any other position was fine as long as it didn't involve leadership, decision making, or command. And because Briscoe still loved the game, he said yes. He became a Pro Bowl wideout, catching passes instead of throwing them, carving a second life out of the wreckage of his first. But the truth haunted him. He hadn't been beaten by competition. He'd been buried by a system terrified of his success. The league didn't just bench him, it exiled him. Time passed, but Marlon Briscoe's ghost lingered quietly behind every sideline. The league tried to forget him, but the game itself remembered. Every time a new black quarterback entered training camp, the old doubts returned. Can he read defenses? Can he lead men? The same coded questions used to erase Briscoe in the first place. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, the NFL stayed polite in public but closed its doors in private. Teams drafted black quarterbacks and converted them to wide receivers or defensive backs before they ever threw a pass. They called it athletic versatility, but every player knew the translation: "We don't want you under center." Doug Williams broke the wall in 1988 when he won the Super Bowl for Washington, but even he carried the shadow of what Briscoe endured. In interviews years later, Williams called Marlin the man who did it first and paid for it. Marlon himself didn't talk much about what happened. He stayed humble, sometimes too humble. The game that had betrayed him still lived inside him. He struggled after football, fought through addiction, and rebuilt himself again, quieter, wiser, still carrying that unspoken wound that only pioneers know. But when history finally came back around, when the NFL began celebrating black quarterback firsts, his name started whispering back into the light. Reporters rediscovered the footage, those grainy 1968 clips where a young man in orange and blue rolled right, dodged two tacklers, and fired a perfect strike into the end zone. The crowd exploded. The legend of the magician flickered back to life. By the time Marlon Briscoe passed away in 2022, the league had finally begun to admit what it once refused to see: that he was the first modern black quarterback to start in pro football. But more than that, he was proof that talent could threaten power. Because Marlon didn't just play football, he redefined what it meant to lead. He stood in the huddle and showed a generation that intelligence, grace, and authority didn't belong to one color. And for that, they tried to erase him. But stories like this don't stay buried forever, because every time a black quarterback steps under center, calls the play, and commands the field, Marlon Briscoe lives again. For decades, the story of Marlon Briscoe was treated like a rumor, a footnote whispered between barbershops and locker rooms, but never spoken aloud by the league that had buried him. The NFL moved on, building billion-dollar empires on the backs of men who never knew whose shoulders they stood on. But time has a way of forcing truth back into the light. By the 1990s, the game had changed. Warren Moon had become a superstar. Doug Williams had lifted the Lombardi Trophy. Randall Cunningham was turning broken plays into poetry. And in each of them, there was a trace of Briscoe: the calm, the vision, the defiance. The future he'd shown them in 1968 had finally arrived, even if no one had said his name. Then came the documentaries, the retrospectives, the sudden rediscovery. Reporters began asking how the first black starting quarterback in modern pro football could vanish from memory for so long. Old coaches mumbled excuses. Executives claimed ignorance. But everyone knew. The silence had been deliberate. The league had rewritten its own history, and the truth no longer fit the image it wanted to sell. When Briscoe was finally invited to the NFL events late in life, he stood on those stages with quiet grace. No bitterness, no speeches about revenge. He didn't need them. His existence was his vindication. Every highlight reel that once ignored him now had to make space for his name. The same league that had once denied him a place at quarterback was now forced to call him a pioneer. Yet the reckoning didn't end there. Each new controversy, every time a black quarterback was questioned for being too flashy or not a leader, felt like a faint echo of that same prejudice. You could still hear the ghost of the magician in every doubt, every coded phrase. Because Marlin's story wasn't just about one man's erasure, it was about a system that feared what his success meant. He never saw himself as a martyr. He saw himself as a player who loved the game enough to endure its betrayal. But his quiet defiance outlived him. It seeped into every play where courage meets control, every throw that rewrites expectation, every moment a young quarterback dares to take command of the field. Marlon Briscoe was erased from history once, but not anymore. His name now lives where the league can't touch it, in truth, in legacy, and in the memory of everyone who finally knows the magician really was.